Hey guys. Now, of course, I share concern with what we see as the increased militarization of the police. Is If you've noticed, though, retired Marine General James Mattis, who had served under Obama, and then he was brought in as Defense Secretary under Trump, and then resigned over differences with Trump, has recently come out and denounced the use of the National Guard to suppress peaceful protests. And he spoke very strongly about his oath to defend the Constitution, and that the other members of the military who are being called in to do this have sworn to protect the Constitution and the values enshrined in it. But so I think we also have to keep in mind that sometimes presidents clearly have a wrong expectation of what they think is tough. Remember, George W. Bush said, no, we're not going to try terror suspects in civilian courts. I remember his Attorney General Ashcroft speaking with contempt about the loopholes in our civilian law. Like, you're the Attorney General, the Chief Counsel of the country, and you have contempt for our system. Like, those loopholes are, things that you and I would depend on when we go into a courtroom. Protections that work in favor of us. But anyway, here's the thing that he expected. We'll have those military tribunals down in Gitmo. What were people expecting? Some people were expecting, well, these military juries and the military judges are going to have no sympathy for these detainees, and they're going to throw away the niceties of our laws. And what happened? Hamdan, the chauffeur for Osama bin Laden. Bush's team went down there to press the case to get this guy a sentence of 30 years. The jury, comprised of military officers, American military officers, said, yeah, material support. He was bin Laden's driver. He's making $200 a month to support his family. He was not like a critical player in Al-Qaeda. He wasn't involved in policy making and plotting attacks, since he was a driver. And the jury knew that he was going to get credit for time served, which was 61 months and a few weeks. So the sentence that he got was 66 months, which meant only a half year more. Instead of a 30-year sentence, it was half a year. It worked out to be only a half year that he would be serving beyond that. And then the presiding judge, a Navy captain, Keith Allred, said, I hope you're with your family soon. And Hamdan said, Inshallah, Arabic for God willing, God willing. And then, I'm going to paraphrase, and then Allred continued his good wishes for the detainees. And I hope that you're, with your family again, and you're able to be a husband, a father, and a provider in the best sense of the word. And Hamdan again said, Inshallah, God willing. And the military judge goes, Inshallah, God will. What were you expecting? You expected zero sympathy. The military officers have this profound sentimentality, a principled attachment to our highest ideals, to the commitment to civilian rule, which is why there's this great reluctance for military, top brass, even if they're retired, to make political statements that civilians vote in Congress and the president is the commander-in-chief of the military, and the military answers to civilian authority, and they don't want to interject as effectively the ruler. They're there to hear from the civilian authorities. So this is another norm that is being eroded by the necessity created by the current administration. But Bush's expectation, well, this idea of toughness was going to be a lack of empathy or a lack of compassion. Trump assumed that he calls in Mattis, brings in John Kelly, and he assumes what? That they're just going to be, that they're going to have no sympathy for detainees or suspects, and Kelly makes a point of explaining why torture doesn't work in our favor. McMaster was brought in as a national security advisor. He's famous in 2004. Some of us who'd been following events a little bit, some of us who were civilians but were still kind of trying to keep up on things in Iraq, he came in and took over a very troubled unit that had been involved in detainee abuse, and he retrained them for their 2004 redeployment, and he told them you emphasize respectful treatment of detainees, basically had them have questions like a customer service survey that the detainees would be given before they left, like as if they were leaving a hotel. How was the food? How were you treated? And McMaster told the troops, trying to get this right, but it basically told them, every time you treat an Iraqi with disrespect, you are working for the enemy. You can Google it to find if I got close to the exact quote, but that's the idea. But keep in mind, you've got George Washington telling Colonel Benedict Arnold, this is years before the treason, as he's going into Canada with a continental detachment, but also some Indian allies. And he goes, look, you got to treat both the settlers and the Indians of Canada with respect, and make sure that the soldiers and the officers under your command, how did he put it? That not only their honor and the good of their country, but their safety depends on the treatment of these people. And then 1937, as China is facing an attack by the Empire of Japan. For China, it's the beginning of World War II. In Europe, World War II will start in 1939. It started for China in 1937. And Mao Zedong writes a little booklet called On Guerrilla Warfare, gets it out there, and he emphasizes that the troops need to be respectful to the civilians. They have to be good to enemy prisoners. That all of this matters, and that troops among the people have to be like fish in the water. And how did he put it? It is only undisciplined troops who make the people their enemy and, like the fish out of its native element, cannot live. So you have George Washington telling you that the safety of the troops depends on how they treat civilians. You have Mao Zedong telling you that troops that make the people their enemy cannot live. Keep in mind in 2007, when Petraeus revamped the approach in Iraq, and he emphasized the same thing, that you have to treat the civilian population with respect, and you have to treat prisoners with respect. And here's the other thing, in that manual that the Marine Corps and the Army co-issued, the counterinsurgency manual, hardly ever are these branches going to jointly release a publication like this. So it was a big deal. And one of the recommended readings there in the appendix was works of Mao Zedong. So keep in mind, I'm not pulling this out of the blue. It's part of what guerrilla warfare is going to influence also how you look at counter-guerrilla warfare, counterinsurgency. And there's an irony, and it applies to police. The emphasis had to be taken away from hunkering down in one concentrated area where American forces had been in the so-called green zone, where they had 24-hour electricity or whatever, and they were doing all right, and they were concentrated, separated from the people. And Petraeus said, these things that look like you're keeping your people safe are actually endangering your people. Petraeus rearranged it so that no, like maybe a few soldiers would be in an area, they'd live in a neighborhood, they'd be spread out there, and they wouldn't go around in a big old convoy of intimidating vehicles. They would be, they would walk a neighborhood. They would live in that neighborhood, and if that neighborhood didn't have running water 24 hours a day, then our soldiers in that neighborhood were living in the same conditions. They understood what the people were going through because they were going through it with them. And what looks like making them exposed to danger by putting them in contact with the people and teaching them respect and putting them out there was actually making them safer and making success more likely. This whole idea about coming in and cracking skulls is going to teach those civilians a thing or two. The poisonous thing about that kind of attitude when you were justifying torture between like 2003 to the early part of 2007 is that you had a bunch of soldiers who were convinced that leveling Fallujah was a great idea. That mistreating people was a great idea. This is how you get stuff done. Well, what happens when soldiers who are convinced to treat civilians like crap come back and say, let's say they get a job as a police officer? How does their training affect their interaction with the free press, their interaction with protesters, their interaction with the enemy? It's only undisciplined troops who make the people their enemy. This should not be happening. It's not good for us as a country. It's not good for the people doing it. You think you're keeping yourself safe by loading on that gear and going out in huge numbers and beating the shit out of people. Long term, this isn't working in your favor. Thanks.